ॐ स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय असतो मा सद्गमय तमसो मा ज्योतिर्गमय मृत्योर्मामृतङ्गमय। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्ति। Let us offer our salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, the embodiment of all religions, the establisher of the universal religion. Let us pray. To lead us from unreal to the real, from the darkness of ignorance to the light of knowledge, from death to immortality. Peace, peace, peace be unto all. Friends, welcome to you all. Today I am speaking on the subject Shankara and Vedanta. The message of Vedanta began to be given to humanity since the time of Bhagavad Shankaracharya. He is one of the most outstanding personalities who had a masterly intellect. He just lived for 32 years, but during this short span of life, he achieved most wonderful spiritual heights and shared that divine bliss of experience with all the spiritual seekers of the world. He was born in the year 788 AD. To give a brief sketch of the life of Acharya Shankar, his parents' name Shivaguru and Aryamba. For a long time they didn't have children, so they went to a temple of Lord Shiva and took a vow to undergo austerities in the temple so that they could be blessed with the child. They were fortunate enough to have the grace of Lord Shiva, who agreed that he would be born as their son, and that was Shankaracharya. By the time he was 8 years old, just 8 years, He had mastered all the four Vedas, the Upanishads, and he came to know what is what. He came to know the significance of the material knowledge and the spiritual knowledge. To what limits the material knowledge will take one, to what spiritual heights the spiritual knowledge leads one. This young boy could think about his goal in life during his formative period. So a desire came to him, an intense desire, that he wanted to lead a monastic life of a monk. He wanted to renounce the world, meaning he doesn't want to aspire for the material knowledge which is temporary, which doesn't give real peace or joy. So, his deep study in the spiritual texts gave direction to his future course of life. He came in contact with one of the great spiritual masters of the time. His name was Govinda Bhagavat Pad, on the banks of the holy river Narmada. He was initiated by him. Because of his pure character, fine intellect, and brilliance, Shankaracharya gave masterly discourses on the famous Brahma Sutras, the aphorisms of the Vedas, Upanishads, and Bhagavad Gita. Then he established Advaita Vedanta, the doctrine of non-dualism. He traveled all over the country and he left incredible impression on the people. That was a time when people were confused about the teachings of the Vedas. They were fed up by the ritualistic way of approach. So it was at that crucial time Shankaracharya came and gave the light of hope. That was a time when Buddhism was most prevalent all over the country in India. So the Vedic message was being distorted because there was no proper people to show them the correct way, the correct interpretation. There were no spiritual masters to impart that wonderful message of the Vedas. So the advent of Shankaracharya was great. It was of great significance. In a way, Acharya Shankar saved Hinduism by giving the message of Vedanta to the world. Of course, in later times, Swami Vivekananda came here and he has given masterly discourses on Vedanta, which you may all read in the complete works of Vivekananda. He had 4 chief disciples. One is Padmapad, the second is Hastamalak, third is Totakacharya, and the Fourth one is Sureshwaracharya. They were the four chief disciples of Acharya Shankar who took personal care and attention to teach Vedanta, and all these four disciples became very eminent and have written wonderful treatises on Vedanta, and they were all realized souls. What Shankaracharya says, Jivan Mukti, attaining liberation while you are alive, not after death. Who knows what will happen after death? Nobody will be able to know what is what. It is worthwhile to achieve whatever you want when you are living. So, these four disciples were very brilliant in their career, in their achievements. Acharya Shankara wrote the first commentary on Vishnu Sahasranama, the 1,000 names of Lord Vishnu. Of course, all his commentaries were in Sanskrit. Those days they used to speak in Sanskrit, and all the discussions, etc., were in Sanskrit only. Even now, there are many Sanskrit schools in India where people talk in Sanskrit only. It's a Sanskrit medium. It's a wonderful language if you only have desire to learn and know the spiritual truths. And then, of course, Acharya Shankara wrote commentaries on Brahma Sutras, Upanishads and the Gita. The most famous of his texts is that he wrote Viveka Chudamani, a very masterly book on the Vedanta, for which we have got the commentary written by Chandrasekhar Bharati of Sringeri Shankaracharya Peetha. He also wrote Upadesha Sahasya, 1,000 teachings, 1,000 verses. All these texts are available in our bookstore. Upadesha Sahasri, Shivananda Lahari, Saundarya Lahari. And he composed many songs, many hymns on gods and goddesses. He traveled all over India and established Vedanta on the firm footing. He established 4 mutts. One is at Sringeri, which is the first mutt established. The second one was Dwarka. Third one was Kedarnath in Himalayas. Fourth one is Puri. He established 10 traditions of monks. It's called Dashanami Sampradaya. Tirtha, Ashrama, Vana, Aranya, Giri, Parvata, Sagara, Saraswati, Bharati, Puri. Like these 10 names. So, Bharati Tirtha. So, Tirtha is added in the end. Ananda Ashrama. Ashrama is added in the end. Ananda Vana. Like that. We Ramakrishna Mission monks, we belong to one of the 10 traditions of Acharya Shankar. We belong to Puri. Totapuri was the guru of Sri Ramakrishna. Actually, we are all to be named as Chidananda Puri, Bhashyananda Puri, like that. So, we belong to that Puri tradition. In fact, the famous festival occurs in India every 12 years once and 25 years once, which we call Kumbh Mela. I was fortunate to attend one of the Kumbh Melas in Haridwar. Several thousands of monks gather. That was the occasion for all the monks to come there, and they all go in procession to take bath in the Brahmakund, in the holy Ganga. And so the 10 traditions of the Acharya Shankar, they would go in procession. Afterwards the others follow. So we also would go in the procession as one of the uh, traditions that we practice. Now this is in brief about the life sketch of Acharya Shankar. If you want to know the details, it's a very interesting life. We have got a book published in our ashram, Shankara Digvijaya, written by Vidyaranya, one of the pontiff of the Sringeri Mutt. The original is written in Sanskrit. It has been translated into English by Swami Tapasyanandaji of Madras Mutt. It's a very fine book giving you all the details about life and achievements of Acharya Shankar. Now coming to the teachings, what he taught, how it became very much popular among the people. Very interesting if we review the whole history. Shankara's teachings are grounded on scriptures. First point. Secondly, they are guided by yukti, means reasoning. He doesn't want to accept simply. Blind faith has no place in Vedanta. No blind faith business. Reason out and form a conviction. Thirdly, they are confirmed by anubhava, experience. So, through his words of Vedantic wisdom, Shankaracharya rescued the erring mortals from tormenting fires of life in this vale of tears. He preached no doctrine of his own, but he expounded and taught the teachings that existed in the Upanishads from the time immemorial. These teachings were known only to the forest hermits. They were not known to the people at large. There is reason for that, because the reason is that people were not ready to receive that message. One has to have certain qualifications, certain formation in his life, certain samskaras are to be well established in him to understand and practice Vedanta. In addition to the commentaries, Acharya Shankar, as I told you earlier, composed a good many original books on the Vedanta philosophy, in which he succeeded in making that philosophy both popular and explanatory. So what is the object of this Vedanta philosophy? Everything must have an object, It is to make one free from all bondages of life, by making him conscious of his real self, which is called Paramatman, the Supreme Being. So now the object is identified. It is recognized. This is the object. It is fixed. That object is not very far away. It is in our own heart. It is in our own being. It is the being of the beings. It also teaches that the being of the beings, what we call Paramatman, is also called in Vedanta by the term Brahman. It teaches that Brahman alone is real, everything else is unreal. First point. Second point, the human soul every individual soul who are sitting here is verily that Brahman, not separate from him. That Brahman is one without a second. Satchidananda, existence, knowledge, bliss is his nature. The human soul is immortal, ever conscious, ever free, and ever blissful. This is our real nature. Now the examples are given. There is a sun. Sun is only one, but it appears as many when the sun is reflected in different water parts. Let us take another example. Sky. It is one. The vast space, it is one. But it appears as many in different enclosures. So, the one indivisible Atman appears as many in different bodies which are the creations of Maya. I will come next to define what is Maya. First I am giving the principal tenets of Vedanta so that you can have some idea about what exactly Vedanta means. Another example is given. Gold is there. Varieties of ornaments are made. Each ornament has got different name and different form, different shape. But they are all made of the same gold. Gold is the content of all these various ornaments having different names, different shapes, different beauty. Even so, the Paramatman is one, but he appears as many in different names and forms, in different bodies, through Maya. So who is responsible for all this confusion, for all this illusion, for all this pain, pleasure, all sorts of things going on? In one word it is explained: Maya. Another example. Ocean is there. The wave of the ocean, it is nothing but water. Although it has name and form, small wave, big wave, so are the names and forms. They are apparent only. Apparent reality. They seem to be real. Seeming reality cannot be concluded as reality. I am supposed to be in this body. How long? Maybe for 20, 30 years more. After body is gone. So how can you call this a real one? It appears to be real, but really it is not real. So the root cause of all these things is Maya. This Maya is the power of Brahman. It has three qualities by which it binds all the creatures, from poor to rich, from king to the beggar. Any body in the creation is bound by these three qualities. What are they? Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. Sattva means calmness. Rajas means activity. Tamas means inertia. So these have many different phases by which is created the whole world. So because the whole world is manipulated because of the interaction of these three qualities in different levels, on account of permutation combination of these three gunas, we see so many varieties, infinite varieties in the creation, which is neither real nor unreal. Why it is not real? It is not real because when a man has attained to his real self, it no longer exists. It is not unreal because it exists so long as a man does not realize his real self, but thinks that he is a body, he has a name and form. I am that individual. I want to retain my individuality. My ego is very important for me. So once nature is tested by touching his ego, you hurt his ego, he flares up like anything. Mysterious and indescribable is this Maya. But this is true, that Maya vanishes after the realization of Brahman, which is pure, one without a second. Once we have that anubhava of the highest reality, then no more Maya, no more this confusion, no more this wailing and weeping. He that knows this Brahman as his own self becomes free from fears. Abhaya is a quality of the realized person. For all fear comes from the knowledge of another different from self. If one only exists everywhere, what is to fear for what? So when a man knows all to be one, and that one his own self, whom then shall he fear? So the Vedanta philosophy teaches fearlessness. As long as we are afraid of, it only indicates we are still under the spell of Maya. Still we are in ignorance. Still spirituality is far away from us. Then, Vedanta teaches discrimination, what we call in Sanskrit a very appropriate term, viveka. Viveka. Discrimination is not a correct translation, but near translation you can say. But anyway, reason out properly what is real and what is unreal. It teaches self-control, both external and internal. Spirituality begins with discipline. If you have no discipline, no spirituality. Even if you are in temple, even if you are in church, even if you are in heavens, spirituality is a zero. Spirituality begins on the foundation of discipline, both internal and external. Then the Vedanta teaches patience, sahana, tolerance, concentration of mind, and respect and faith in truth. No compromise when it comes to the question of truthfulness. So Vedanta asks us to hear about them, to hear about the Atman, Shravan, to think on it, Manan, to meditate on it, Nididhyasana, and then to realize it, Anubhava. So Shravan, Manan, Nididhyasana, these three disciplines lead us to final realization, Anubhava. For as soon as the Atman is realized, what is the result? All the knots of the heart are rent asunder, all doubts cease to exist, and all the duties of life are fulfilled. Until you realize that highest truth, you are always duty bound. I have got this duty, I have got that duty. You are tied down by duties and duties. Sometimes you will be confused. Sometimes people are confused about duties also. Now, blessed indeed is he who can attain this. Blessed is he who tries for this. It is not an easy thing to aspire for spiritual life. It is not an easy thing to practice it. So, Vedanta clearly explains what is spiritual entity. Vedanta speaks of the oneness behind this universe. God is ultimately oneness. From oneness came this manifoldness. In the universe we find that the things are in constant flux. Things change. Therefore, there must be something which is unchanging. Otherwise, how can we perceive the change? As a result, we find we are not only body and mind, that there is something beyond the mind. If there is something beyond the mind, it is not material. The mind changes. Thus the mind is material, though subtle. That which doesn't change is eternal. That which is eternal is a spiritual entity. It is infinite. There is no division in the infinite. It is oneness, and that oneness is Brahman, the ultimate reality. If we perceive that oneness with our human intellect or human emotions, then that oneness becomes a personal God. That is how the conception of personal God came to us. Proof of a personal God is the impersonal Brahman, the infinite. That is how Vedanta proves the existence of God. Vedanta is based on the Vedic scriptures, the most essential portion being the Upanishads. In one of the Upanishads we find a tremendous question. A spiritual aspirant put this question: what is that by knowing which everything else is known? It's a simple question, but not so simple as it appears. How do we acquire knowledge? By collecting facts from external nature? Of course, man has advanced tremendously in science. He has landed on the moon. Wonderful achievement. Perhaps the most important event in the history of human existence. We are very happy that a seemingly impossible feat has been accomplished, and justifiably so. Everyone is amazed. It is a legitimate elation. But what is gained by going to the moon? Suppose we obtain all the knowledge of the moon and have dozens of crowded passenger planes flying back and forth. There are still millions of stars and planets remain to be explored. Where is the end? So we merely collect facts from nature. From one standpoint, our knowledge is vast. From another standpoint, it is insignificant. So, Narada, one of the great saints, he put this question. It is tiring to collect knowledge this way. It is very tiresome. It is impossible to get complete knowledge of even the material world. So what really is that by knowing which everything else will be known? And what was the answer? There are two kinds of knowledge. One is higher knowledge, the other lower. The lower knowledge relates to the things of the material world, of which we are all conscious of it. Higher knowledge is knowledge of the eternal, knowledge of the imperishable. Unless we have knowledge of the eternal, we have no peace of mind. We cannot have real bliss. True, we shall have some joy in this world, but it is invariably followed by misery. Always, pain is more than the pleasure. We may receive peace and joy, but afterwards will come misery of the same degree of intensity. In this way, life goes on from action to reaction. All our life is being guided from action to reaction. In this one sentence, the whole philosophy of life is explained. Action to reaction. Knowledge of the external world, therefore, does not give peace. So the great ancient saint and scholar, Narada Maharshi, went to a teacher and said very practically, "Sir, I have a long list of the branches of learning. I have studied politics, philosophy, astrology, whatnot. But unfortunately, I have no peace of mind. I have heard that only the knowledge of the self will give one peace of mind. Please teach me how to have that knowledge of the self." So this is the question put by the saint. Let us ask the same question. Do our modern scholars and scientists who are toiling their whole life in discovering things, are they able to achieve peace of mind? The scientist's discoveries might be overwhelming, and his scholarship might be enormous, but has he been able to attain peace of mind? No. They do not know where to turn. Yet in ancient times, Narada Maharshi asked the question so straightforwardly. I have heard that only the knowledge of the self brings peace of mind. Please teach me how to get that knowledge of the self. So when this question was asked, the teacher was also very eminent and practical person. He did not send him to a theological institution for studies for 8 years. He did not ask him to read any books. Enough of that. It is another realm where one acquires the knowledge of the self. So the teacher told Narada, what did he say? When Narada put this question, the teacher said, meditate. This Narada took as a very important teaching, and he did meditation. He did meditate on the subject which he wanted to know, and then he returned to the teacher. Again he was sent away. Again he returned. Like that 2-3 times, coming back and forth. Finally, Narada came to the teacher and said, Master, I have found out. I have found out the truth. What is that? There is no real bliss in anything finite. The bliss is only in the infinite. That's the truth he arrived at by deep meditation. The infinite is bliss. Whoever has known the infinite will find bliss. Sri Ramakrishna was always in ecstatic mood because he had realized the infinite. There is no joy in the finite world. And what is meant by the infinite? The infinite means a state in which one will not see another, in which one will not hear another. That is the state of oneness. Where there is no duality. There is no thinking there. Thinking presupposes 3 things: subject, object, and the act of thinking. That is not the infinite. The infinite is not thinking, it is thought itself. It is a state of unalloyed bliss. So, having realized this, Narada became one of the great saints. There is another story of another spiritual aspirant. He was not a scholar, but he was also troubled with the same question as Narada. So he went to his father. Father was a very great spiritual person. He asked him directly and pointedly, Father, please tell me the knowledge of Brahman. Give me the knowledge of Brahman. Teach me how to realize it. Brahman is the ultimate reality. Here also the father did not prescribe any course of theology for his son. He said, Tapasyat Brahma Vijijñāsasva. Seek the knowledge of Brahman through spiritual practice. Follow some discipline. He did not give any other direction. He didn't give any other instruction or teachings. Just he said like this. The boy went and practiced a while. First he thought, matter is Brahman. Food is matter. By eating food, we sustain ourselves. So matter is Brahman. He went to his father for confirmation of his conclusion. And the father again sent him back. No, that's not the correct thing. Go back. Do meditate again. The boy went into deeper meditation. Then he thought, probably the vital breath is Brahman. Because if the breath stops, people die. He thought he had the answer. But still he had some doubt, so he wanted to confirm it. So he went to the father. Again father did not approve. Asked him to go back and meditate further. Then the son thought, perhaps mind is Brahman. Of course, mind is a subtle thing. We have no peace of mind. Mind rules us. So mind must be Brahman. He went to his father again. And again father sent him back. Then the son thought, perhaps understanding is Brahman. Understanding, that is buddhi. what we call in Sanskrit. In Vedanta, we make a distinction between mind and buddhi. Mind means that which considers pros and cons of the thing, words. But when you reach a final decision, it is called buddhi. Since mind always changes, but buddhi doesn't change as much, he thought, understanding, Ananda is Brahman, bliss is Brahman. The perennial force of bliss was opened up and he was full of bliss. He said, this is Brahman. From bliss the universe has come into existence. It is sustained by bliss, and to bliss it goes at the end of this cycle. So by direct experience he attained knowledge of the self. Truth is obtained by direct experience, not from hearsay. It is direct experience. Such is the proof of the existence of God or the ultimate reality. One of the Upanishads has said, the ultimate reality or Brahman or God cannot be realized by mere learning, mere reading, or by mere discussion. That knowledge can be had, that realization can be had if one seeks it with all his heart, soul and mind. When you aspire for it, when you long for it, when you yearn for it with sufficient intensity, then only will it come. It will come from within. It is within. It comes from within. One of the seers of the Upanishad said, it cannot be known by arguments nor by intellect. Nayamatma pravachanena labhyaha. Upanishad statement. It cannot be known from a person who is merely a scholar, but it can be known from a man of God. Man of God. That's very important. Because arguments, if you are convinced by the arguments of even a person of great intellect, you are convinced only for the time being. A person of still greater intellect comes along and presents contrary arguments, and your original conviction is shaken. That means argumentation will not give you knowledge of the self. You can have it only by direct experience, anubhava. That's very important. However, if you hear from a person who has this direct experience, that is proof, and you cannot resist it. A person who has known God directly can transform you. If you see such a person, his mere presence will be enough. When you hear the words of a person who himself is a man of God, then you can have right understanding. That's what we have seen in the life of Sri Ramakrishna, who had the experience of God. When Vivekananda came and had talked with Sri Ramakrishna, his whole mind got clarified. The proof of the existence of God, our ultimate reality, is direct experience. These experiences are not mere speculation, not mere history of past events. These truths were realized by not one but many saints in their own lives. In modern times, we have the record of Sri Ramakrishna's life and experience. He was nearly constantly in a superconscious state. That was his normal condition. Only by sheer force he was able to bring his mind down to the ordinary level. But his normal state was samadhi state, always ecstatic. What is that state? Going to the moon is a miraculous feat, no doubt. But a finite mind reaching the infinite, what a tremendous thing it is. We say that Sri Ramakrishna is a man of God. He had attained Samadhi. But what was that experience? He transcended the finite world. He penetrated through it. He discovered what was behind it. A finite being reaching the infinite, or in devotional language, crossing the feet of the infinite. It's a tremendous thing, tremendous achievement. The whole world changes. It becomes different. He says that God pervades everything. Sri Ramakrishna lived in this age. There were many people who have witnessed this unbelievable events of his life. It is not simply a legend. It is not the emotional exaggeration of some devotees. Many skeptics came to Sri Ramakrishna. Agnostics came. People, as a rule, didn't believe in him at that time. They would often criticize him. People were critical, but those who came to scoff at Sri Ramakrishna were transformed and remained to pray. In this modern age, it happened. A man became God on earth in the human body. Vedanta calls this Jivan Mukti, liberation while in the body. Very important point. Liberation while in the body. Moksha, Sanskrit word. So liberation is a very fine word which is loosely used. We use many words very loosely. Like that, liberation also is used that way. So it is made very clear here. In Vedanta it is made very clear. Liberation is not political freedom or social freedom or freedom to do anything we like. It is not that. Liberation means freedom from the bondage of matter. Mind itself is a matter. In order to have freedom from the bondage of matter, to become the master of our mind, to overcome the slavery of the mind, we must regard the mind as an object with floating thoughts. It is possible to realize this. Sri Ramakrishna in our modern times realized this. Vedanta assures that everyone can realize that state. The divine state will not come from outside. It is our real self. We are the infinite. We are divine. However, this divinity we do not recognize. It is dormant within us. It is not sleeping. It is ever awake. But we are not aware of that. We must know. We must realize that. In spiritual life, if we are sincere, realization can come at any moment, for it is ours. That is the truth. That is the real truth. That is the goal for which we are thirsting, for which we are searching through all our blunders, through all our trials, all our mistakes. We must be earnest in our spiritual practice, then we shall have realization. We must realize a goal in this very life. Vedanta emphasizes on this aspect of spirituality. Now, I would like to summarize the whole thing. The time is already up. The quintessence of philosophy of Shankara is stated by himself. Point by point I am going to tell now, so that you may remember everything when you go back after the class is over. First point is, the absolute spirit is the reality. The world of appearance is illusory. The so-called individual soul is the absolute itself and no other. The Upanishadic terms Brahman and Atman indicate the highest reality, which is non-dual. As the nature of the absolute cannot be defined in terms of any category, the Upanishads refer to it as not this, not this, neti, neti, na iti, na iti. This does not mean, however, that the absolute is a night of nothingness, a contentless void. It doesn't mean that. It is a plenary being, the sole reality. In some texts of the Upanishads, positive expressions are also employed with reference to Brahman, like Satyam, Jnanam, Anantam, Anandam, like that, existence, knowledge, bliss, and so on. But these two are designed to make us understand the real by telling us what it is not, namely, that it is not non-being, not inert, and not related to sorrow. To define a thing is to limit it, to finitize it. The infinite and the unlimited cannot be characterized in terms of finite categories. It's a very important point. Brahman is nirgun, without characteristics. Even to say that it is one, not strictly true. For the category of number is inapplicable to the absolute. That is why Shankara calls the philosophy of Advaita the doctrine of the not two, or non-dualism. It is true that there are in the Upanishads passages which characterize Brahman as the cause of the world and as the home of all auspicious qualities. But how are we to reconcile the two views? The view of Brahman as the absolute without characteristics, and the view which characterizes it as the world ground. To solve this problem, Shankaracharya postulates two standpoints. One is absolute Paramarthika standpoint, the other is relative Vyavaharika standpoint. The supreme truth is that Brahman is non-dual and relationless. It alone is. There is nothing real besides it. But from our standpoint, which is the empirical, relative standpoint, Brahman appears as God, the cause of the world. There is no real causation. The world is but an illusory appearance in Brahman, even as the snake is in the rope. This doctrine is known as Vivartavada, that is the theory of phenomenal appearance, which is to be distinguished from its rival Parinamavada, the theory of transformation. It's very interesting. If you want to study deeply, you can refer to Vedantic texts. The principle that makes for the phenomenal appearance of the world is called Maya. Maya has significance only from the relative standpoint and not from the standpoint of the absolute. The supreme truth is that Maya is that which is not Ma. But from our point of view, Maya appears as the inscrutable power of God that veils the true and projects the untrue. Now, the power of veiling is termed Avarana Shakti. Suppose I put a cloth in front of my face. It's called Avaran. I am closing my face by putting the cloth. And the next one is that of projecting. It's called Vikshepa. If one were to ask, is Maya real or not? The only answer would be, it is neither real nor unreal. Because the world of plurality appears, Maya is not unreal. Because Maya is sublated by the knowledge of the non-dual self, it is not real. It cannot be both real and unreal. Therefore, it is indeterminable. What we call in Sanskrit again, anirvachaniyam. Any inquiry into Maya is not to make the concept intelligible, but to enable one to go beyond it. When one has gone beyond, there remains no problem to be solved. Who is it that seeks to go beyond Maya? It is the Jiva, the living soul. The soul is, in essence, the same as Brahman. On account of avidya or ignorance, which is the individual counterpart of Maya, it identifies itself with a psychophysical organism and is caught up in the tract of samsara, cycle of birth and death. The sheets of body, life and mind that cover the soul are products of Maya. These in consequence come to be mistaken for the self. Their characteristics are wrongly imposed on the imperishable spirit. The soul, which has neither birth nor death, is supposed to be born and to die with the body. Action and enjoyment are believed to belong to it. All these notions are due to ignorance. The only cure for this malady is true wisdom. The reason why jnana or wisdom is taught in Advaita as a direct means to liberation is that liberation is not something which is to be newly achieved. Liberation or moksha is the eternal nature of the self. This supreme fact remains unrealized because of avidya. What is to be accomplished is the removal of avidya, and that which can accomplish this is knowledge. The point that should be specially noted is that by knowledge or wisdom, what is meant here is not mere intellectual understanding, but intuitive and direct experience. When all the obstacles to knowledge have been removed through karma yoga and bhakti yoga, and when the path of self-inquiry has been successfully pursued, the knowledge of the non-dual spirit dawns even as the sun rises at the termination of the night. Liberation through knowledge is attained the moment ignorance is dispelled. As liberation is the eternal nature of the self, one need not wait to realize it when death overtakes the physical body. Even while tenanting a body, one is liberated at the onset of knowledge. Such a one is called a Jivan Mukta. From his standpoint, there is no body at all. He seems to live in a body only to the unliberated. After a time, when the body dies, we say he becomes liberated from the body, which we call Videha Mukta. But the truth is that there is no difference in mukti, liberation. When liberation is attained, there is no more travail for the soul. It realizes its non-difference from the absolute, which is called Advaita Anubhava, experience of non-duality. When all the desires that heart harbors are gone, says the Upanishads, then the mortal becomes immortal and attains Brahman even here. Shankara makes it clear beyond doubt that according to this philosophy, there is no need for final despair, no ground for ultimate doubts. The sole reality which Advaita teaches can never be denied, for it is the self of even him who denies. In the Upadesha Sahasri, 1000 verses on teachings composed by Shankaracharya, he said, the self is not an object. There is neither change nor manyness in it. It can neither be received nor rejected either by itself or by anyone else. He who knows that he is the self which is within and without, which is beyond birth and death, decay and age, why should he have even the least fear? Fear results from the erroneous cognition of plurality. Fearlessness is attained when the non-dual absolute is realized. Advaita and Abhaya, non-duality and fearlessness, are but two names for one and the same experience. By calling humanity to a realization of this truth, and by showing the way to that realization, Acharya Shankar became the great benefactor of the world that his name signifies. So I offer my salutations to Sri Shankar Bhagavad, the bestower of blessedness on the world, the repository of all the wisdom that is contained in the sacred texts, and the incarnation of grace. With these words, I conclude my talk. Thank you. As usual, we will have children camp at the Vivekananda Monastery here. The dates of the year's camp will be from August 14th to August 21st, Sunday to Sunday. The children's camp has been a tradition for almost 20 years, and many hundreds of children have attended it. The camp combines classes on the basics of Hinduism with games and other camp activities to provide an atmosphere in which children can learn about their traditions and have a great time. Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunakto Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhitamasto ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om Tat Sat. May the Supreme Lord protect us. May He nourish us. May our activities be performed with full of spirit through His grace. May our studies kindle our knowledge. May we be in peace and harmony. Peace, peace, peace be unto all.